Hey everyone, welcome to the channel, and this video is basically going to be the ultimate GeoGuessr guide to almost every single pole that can be used to identify a country and a region. So I tried to find as many as possible, so this will be a pretty long video, so there will be timestamps. If you want to find some poles that apply more to you, if you know some already, but yeah, this is going to be a pretty in-depth video. But before we get into it, I just want to thank everyone that's subscribed. Just hit 200 subscribers on the channel, and I can't thank you all enough. I wouldn't be making this video without all of you, so thank you so much. This is kind of like my 200 subscriber special. So let's just get right into it. So I'm going to be doing this by continent. So I'm going to start off with both North and South America because there's not a lot of unique poles in these continents, so I'm just going to group them together. So starting off with Mexico. Mexico is pretty well known. It has these octagonal poles. Now, keep in mind that both Colombia and sometimes the Philippines can have octagonal poles, but they'll also have other poles kind of sprinkled in there as well. Mexico will exclusively have these octagonal poles. You can see them pretty much everywhere. If I just move around a little bit, octagonal pole, they're everywhere. So Colombia and the Philippines occasionally does. I'll go through the Philippines later though. Now, moving into South America, we have Brazil. Now, Brazil has primarily ladder poles. Lots of countries have ladder poles, but Brazil is the only South American country with these ladder poles, especially these style of ladder poles, where the gaps in the pole are quite spaced out, as other countries will have different variations of these ladder poles. Now, moving to Chile. Chile also has almost ladder poles, but without the kind of horizontal lines in the middle. So it's just kind of a gap on the inside. You can sometimes find these in New Zealand as well, and I'll go over that later in the video. But yeah, Chile has these poles. They kind of look like ladder poles, but without the horizontal ladder part. Now to our final South American country, we have Argentina. Now, Argentina actually has a couple of unique poles, so I'll be going over a few of those in this video. So the first one, these ones aren't terribly common, but they're quite large, and they look like this, and they're only found in Argentina. Another type of pole you can find in Argentina is these giant concrete poles with these alternating pole tops. They're pretty big, and again, they're only found in Argentina. Moving on to the next continent, we have Europe, and these are kind of the British poles, but they can also be found in Ireland, and they're basically just these wood poles, and then you'll have these hooks coming out the side. And these can be found in England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and I believe also the Channel Islands, and the Isle of Man, but those are pretty rare. Moving south of the United Kingdom, we have France. Now, France does use ladder poles, as you can see here, like these. So they're a lot closer together. The horizontal parts are a lot closer together than the ones in Brazil. And a lot of the time, you'll find these metal brackets around them, and sometimes you can also find a blue sticker on the poles. And these make French ladder poles pretty distinct compared to a lot of other ladder poles. Now, speaking of ladder poles, I'm basically just going to be getting all of those in Europe, at least, out of the way. So, just south of France, we have Spain. And Spain will often have these lighter concrete ladder poles, not as dark as the ones you'll find in France. And again, the horizontal part, like this, is a lot closer together, but they'll be a lot lighter gray than the ones you can find in France. And finally, Portugal also has ladder poles, and they're a lot more similar to the ones in Brazil, with the wider gaps, but Portugal's ladder poles will have holes in them, at least like 95% of the time. And these are Portuguese poles. It's a very easy way to tell a country apart from Spain. Now moving on to the second most common type of unique pole you can find in Europe, and this is the holy pole. Now, 4 countries in Europe use holy poles, and the first one I'm going to be going over is Belgium, because theirs is the most unique. Now, Belgian holy poles are actually pretty small compared to the ones you can find in Poland or Hungary, and they'll also often feature these metal brackets like in France. And like I was saying, Poland also features holy poles. And a lot of the time, the holy poles in Poland will have these very narrow holes and will often be in this either A-frame arrangement or they'll be doubled up straight up like this. Hungary is another country that uses holy poles, and a lot of the time in Hungary, the poles will be a lot wider. The holes will have a lot more depth to them, and in general, they'll be bigger. Of course, you can find smaller ones like this. And finally, the final country in Europe that uses holy poles is Romania. And Romania's are probably the easiest to distinguish from the others. So a lot of the time in Romania, the bottoms of the poles will be painted white, and you can find this yellow paint on them with a warning. There are two more pole types I do want to go over, and the first one is these poles that are found in the Baltic states, which are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And these are just these concrete rectangular poles. They're pretty simple. A lot of the time in Lithuania, however, you can find this A-frame arrangement. You can find this in Estonia and Latvia, but it is less common. Now, the final pole type I want to go over doesn't necessarily narrow down a certain country, but can definitely help narrow down a region. So these are just these cylindrical concrete poles, and these are found in a lot of areas in Europe, from Czechia, Slovakia, Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia. Most of the Balkans actually use poles at least similar to this, as well as a lot of other Eastern European countries. Now on to the shortest continent of this list, we have Africa. And there's only really two countries in Africa that can be identified with poles, and even then there's other metas to kind of tell it apart, but you don't always want to rely on meta, so it is good to know these things. So these are the Senegal poles, and as you can see, they are very close to the poles in Spain. So it's kind of this lighter concrete color with the actual like kind of ladder part, these gaps here being pretty close together. But the pole topper is kind of unique as well. But yeah, these are the Senegal poles. And the other pole type I want to go over in Africa is the Nigerian ladder poles, because when I was newer at the game, this definitely tripped me up a bit because I would often get them confused for Brazilian poles, especially if I wasn't really trying to look around or anything. So Nigeria also has pretty much identical ladder poles to Brazil, the same kind of concrete type. There are some differences in the pole, like this pole topper is a bit different than the one you'll find in Brazil. And of course, there are ways to tell the countries apart. There are, of course, the Nigerian police meta. Now, moving on to the next continent, we have Asia, and starting off with Israel. And Israeli poles are pretty unique as they kind of have like a scaffold look to them, and they're often white. Now, outside of South America, Africa, and Europe, like in North America, Oceania, and especially in Asia, there aren't too many countries that actually use holy poles, except for Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka uses a variety of poles, some of them are more similar to Cambodia or even Thailand, but this pole definitely stands out as it is a holy pole and it is pretty unique. Now, I don't know how often you will actually encounter this, as I haven't seen too many of them, but they are a good way to identify Sri Lanka. Of course, Thai poles are some of the more well-known poles. If you play GeoGuessr, watching GeoGuessr content, you've heard of Thai poles. They are just basically these rectangular poles that are pretty smooth, except for with these holes in them, especially at the top. And a lot of the time you'll have these, this isn't a good example, but you can have these lights that kind of come out at like a 45-degree angle. Just south of Thailand, we have Malaysia. And I've talked about this on the channel a ton, but Malaysia, at least mainland Malaysia, you can be identified with these black stickers on the poles. Now, kind of sticking in the Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific region, we have the Philippines. And as I was saying earlier, the Philippines does have octagonal poles like Mexico. They aren't the only poles. And the Philippines actually has a lot of different poles, and that's a great way to identify it. So here we do have octagonal poles, but if I just move over here, we have more cylindrical poles. We even have wood poles here, so it's kind of a mess of poles all over the place. which is actually a pretty good way to identify the country. Now, moving north to more of the East Asian region, we find Taiwan, and I actually learned the Taiwanese poles first. They were the first poles I ever learned in GeoGuessr because they're pretty easy to remember. And basically it's just this pretty standard pole with these black and yellow stripes at the bottom. Now, it's important to notice that these stripes go all the way to the ground because, as you'll notice, South Korea poles look very similar except that their stripes don't reach the very bottom of the pole. They don't touch the ground. They just kind of hover here. And this is an important distinction to remember because it is a great way to tell South Korea and Taiwan apart, even though they're not particularly similar looking countries. Now for the final Asian country, we have Japan, and Japanese poles are also kinda similar because they also have black and yellow stripes, but they're a bit different as you can see. And well, I don't usually rely on Japanese poles to tell me that I'm in Japan. It can help if, especially if you're unsure if you're in Switzerland or Japan because of the low cam car. And sometimes they can look like this. This isn't particularly common though, but it is an important distinction to make if you can't remember stuff like that. Moving south of Asia to the final continent in this video, we have Oceania and mostly Australia. I will get into New Zealand poles a little bit, but the nice thing about Australia is a lot of the Australian states can actually be identified by their own unique poles. Now, the most well-known ones are, of course, the Northern Territory poles, which are these brown metal poles that are kind of like holy ladder poles. They're their own unique thing. These are only found in the Northern Territory of Australia. Queensland can also be identified by its poles. Now, from here, they don't look particularly unique, just a wood pole. But if you zoom in, you notice these numbers on them, and these are basically on every single pole in Queensland. And these are the only Australian poles that have these numbers on them, these Queensland poles. And sometimes they are in black, sometimes it's just the metal numbers, but either way, only found in Queensland. Now, probably the most well-known Australian poles are the South Australian poles. I don't think I need to explain much, you can tell that they are pretty unique. Now, the final pole in Australia that you can use to identify a state is often overlooked, I feel, and this is the Tasmanian poles. Now, again, if zoomed out, they look like pretty standard wood poles, but if you zoom in, you notice that there's actually this metal band around the poles, and again, this is the case for all the poles. If I just move over here, metal band right there. And this is unique to Tasmania. Now, at the very beginning of the video, I was talking about Chilean poles and how you can sometimes find similar ones in New Zealand. These are these poles. So, typically, these Chilean-looking poles are found in the North Island. Not all the time, but there's a pretty good chance. And more specifically, near Auckland, or in the Auckland area. Again, not every single time, but it is a pretty good chance. Anyways, thank you for watching the video. If you learned something or you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like. If you enjoy my content and haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. It helps so much. And thank you to everyone that has subscribed. Thank you for helping us reach 200 subscribers. Anyways, I'll see you in the next one.